I'm 96 years old, and I left the nursing home without telling anyone. I didn't make a plan, not really. I just waited until the night nurse went down the hall, and I took my coat from the back of the chair. It still smelled faintly of mothballs and something older, like a drawer that hadn't been opened in years. I remember thinking, this coat has seen more of my life than anyone in that building. I didn't run. At my age, there's no such thing as running. I walked slowly, the way they tell you to walk when they're afraid you'll fall. But I didn't fall. Not then. It wasn't bravery. I should say that first. It wasn't a grand decision. It was more like something had finally worn through, like a thread that had been pulled too many times, and one night it just gave way. I don't have much time left. I know that in the same quiet way you know winter is coming when the air changes. It's not something I argue with anymore, but I wanted, just once more, to be somewhere that didn't feel like waiting. That place, the home, it was all waiting. Waiting for meals, waiting for medication, waiting for someone to come and turn off the light you couldn't reach anymore. Waiting for the end, though no one said it out loud. I sat in that chair for months, maybe longer. Days blurred. I'd look at the window, and sometimes I couldn't tell if it was morning or afternoon. The staff were kind, most of them. Tired, but kind. They called me sir, and spoke a little too loudly, as if I had drifted further away than I had. But kindness isn't the same as being known. No one there knew who I had been, not really. And I suppose I had made sure of that long before I ever got there. When you're young, you think your life will explain itself. You think the things you do will leave marks that people can read. But they don't. Not unless you stay close enough for someone to see them. I didn't stay close. I was a practical man. That's what I used to say. I worked in accounting for most of my life. Numbers made sense. They stayed where you put them. They didn't ask for anything beyond accuracy. I liked that. I married at 28. Her name was Eleanor. She had a way of folding her hands when she listened, like she was holding something fragile. I remember that more than her voice now, which feels like a kind of failure. We had one son, Daniel. I wasn't a bad man. I want to be clear about that. I showed up. I paid the bills. I kept things steady. That's what I thought mattered. There were evenings when I came home late, and Daniel would already be asleep. I'd stand in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe. I told myself that was enough, that being there, even quietly, counted for something. Eleanor used to ask me to sit with them at dinner. Just that, nothing complicated. But there was always something else. Work I brought home, a report that needed finishing, numbers that didn't quite line up. I'll eat later, I'd say, and I believed there would always be another dinner. That's how it happens, not all at once, just small decisions, repeated so often they become a life. I remember one Sunday, Daniel must have been 7 or 8. He had a school play. He was a tree, I think, or maybe a soldier. It doesn't matter now. I had promised I would come. Something came up at the office. It always did. I told myself it was important, that it would only take an hour. I missed it. When I got home, he was still awake, sitting on the couch in his little costume, shoes still on. Eleanor didn't say anything. She just looked at me for a second, then turned away. Daniel said, "It's okay, Dad. There were a lot of trees." He smiled when he said it. That's the part I remember most, the way he made it easy for me. I thanked him. Can you imagine that? I thanked him for understanding. That's the kind of man I was. Years passed like that, quietly, efficiently. I advanced at work. We moved to a better house. There was always something to do, something to improve. Eleanor grew quieter. Not suddenly, just a little less each year. We stopped asking each other questions, not because we didn't care, but because we had settled into something that didn't require answers. Or so I thought. Daniel left for university. I helped him pack the car. We shook hands before he drove off. I remember that now, and it feels strange. A handshake between father and son. Eleanor cried after he left. I told her it was normal, that this was how things were supposed to go. We had done our job, I said. I believed that. The house was quieter after that. You'd think I would have noticed, but I filled it with other things. Work, mostly. Always work. Eleanor got sick in her early 60s. It wasn't sudden, but it moved quickly once it started. I went to the appointments. I sat beside her in waiting rooms. I did what was required, but even then, I kept one foot in my routines. I'd leave the hospital and go straight to the office. It felt like maintaining control, like holding on to something stable. She never complained. One night, not long before the end, she said, "You don't have to keep everything running." I didn't know what she meant, or maybe I didn't want to. "I'm fine," I told her. "We're fine." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, the way you do when you accept something you can't change. She died in the spring. The house became something else after that. Not empty, just finished. Like a book you've closed but haven't put away. Daniel came for the funeral. He stood beside me, older now, with lines I hadn't noticed forming. We spoke politely, carefully. He left a few days later. We said we'd keep in touch. We didn't. At first there were calls, then fewer, then holidays only, then nothing for long stretches. I told myself he was busy, that he had his own life, that this was natural. I was good at telling myself things. Years passed. Retirement came and went without much ceremony. I filled my days with small tasks, groceries, bills, the occasional conversation with a neighbor. But something had shifted. There were afternoons when I would sit in the living room and realize I hadn't spoken out loud all day. Not a single word. I tried calling Daniel more often. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. When he did, the conversations were brief, not unkind, just thin. There was one call I remember clearly. I asked him if he'd visit. There was a pause, not long, but long enough. "I'll try," he said. He didn't. I stopped asking after that. You reach a point where you begin to understand what you've built. Not in a dramatic way, just slowly, like a fog lifting. I had built a life that worked. It functioned. It was stable. But it didn't hold people. That realization doesn't come all at once. It settles in pieces. A quiet evening here, a missed call there, a holiday spent alone, telling yourself it's just this year. Then one day you look around, and there's no one left who remembers you as anything other than an old man. I fell in my kitchen when I was 92. Nothing serious, but enough to start the conversations. Doctors, social workers, concerned voices. It might be safer, just for a while. You'll have support. That's how I ended up in that place, the nursing home. I brought a few things with me. some clothes, a photograph of Eleanor and Daniel when he was small, a watch that had stopped years ago, but I kept it anyway. The first night I lay in that narrow bed and listened to the sounds, coffin, footsteps, a television somewhere down the hall. I remember thinking, this is where lives go when they're done being lived. I stayed. Days became routines. Routines became weeks. People came and went. Some left in wheelchairs. Some didn't leave at all. I made small talk, ate the meals, took the medication. But there was a kind of silence underneath everything. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to say. I started thinking about Eleanor more, about Daniel, about all the moments I had treated as if they could be postponed. You think you're saving time. That's the strange part. You think, I'll do this later. I'll sit with them later. I'll listen later. Later becomes something you never quite reach. There was a man down the hall who used to call out for his wife every night. He'd forgotten she had died years ago. The staff would go in, calm him down, tell him everything was okay. I used to wonder which was worse, forgetting or remembering too clearly. I remembered. That's why I left. Not to go anywhere specific. I didn't have a destination. I just wanted to step outside of that waiting, to feel, even briefly, like I was still part of something that moved. The air that night was cold. It surprised me. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, just breathing. I didn't know where to go, so I walked, slowly, carefully, past houses with lights on. I could see people inside, families, couples, ordinary lives unfolding. It felt distant, like watching something through glass. I found a bench and sat down. For a while I just listened. Cars passing, a dog barking somewhere, the sound of a door closing. It occurred to me then that I had spent most of my life moving past these sounds without hearing them, always on the way to something else. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough to understand that there was nowhere to return to. Not really. Eleanor was gone. Daniel, he had his own life, and I was a small part of it now, if that. And the place I had left, it was still there, waiting for me to come back. I'm not telling you this as advice. I don't think it works that way. If I could go back, I wouldn't make grand changes. I wouldn't quit my job or abandon everything. I wasn't built that way. But I would sit at the table more often. I would go to the school play. I would listen when Eleanor spoke instead of thinking about what came next. Small things. They don't feel important at the time. That's the problem. You think importance announces itself, that it arrives with noise, with urgency. It doesn't. It sits quietly in front of you, waiting to be noticed. And if you don't notice, it goes. I'm tired now. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe someone will find me. Maybe I'll go back. Maybe I won't. It doesn't matter as much as it used to. What matters is already behind me. If you're listening to this, just understand that time doesn't move the way you think it does. It doesn't stretch out in front of you. It gathers. And then, one day, it's all behind you. And you're sitting on a bench in the cold, trying to remember the sound of your wife's voice. I can't remember it anymore. That's what stays with me. Not the work, not the house, not the things I thought defined a life, just that absence. I'm 96 years old. and for the first time, I can see it clearly. There isn't much left to do with that kind of clarity, so I'll sit here a little longer. And then, I suppose I'll go wherever people go when there's nowhere else to be.